Dan Wetzel, Yahoo Sports columnist, joining me here on the program once again. Dan, thanks for chiming in. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me, Rich.
Great column as always. You have a very moving one, to say the least, on Yahoo Sports about what's going on in Qatar and how we shouldn't forget that in relation to what we're seeing play out with these indictments. So you're the perfect person to ask this question to. I get a lot of this, certainly with the popularity of the sport and how there's no World Cup coming here and there may not be one for a long time. Why should American sports fans care about this story, Dan?
Well, the World Cup could come here in 2026. I don't know if that matters, but, I think that it's a good question why they should care. I don't know if I have a pure answer for you. I mean, I think there are a lot of soccer fans that should care. It's just a general feeling that you want the sport to be as uncorrupted as possible. I don't think we really need to care whether, say, some Costa Rican soccer official made some extra money on the side. I don't know if that's a big deal. The real-world impact involving the 2022 World Cup in Qatar is significant. And that bid came down to the United States and Qatar. And the United States has, anytime it wants, has an incredibly strong bid to host a World Cup because of all of the NFL and college football stadiums. We have, I think it's 70 stadiums that go over 66,000 seats that are already built and operable that could host a World Cup game. You only need 12. When we bid for the 2022 World Cup, we had all of that. We have all the airports. We have all the train lines. We have everything you possibly could want. You could really run the thing in about a month's time. Qatar had 0 stadiums built, no rail line, literally needed to build hotels, apartments, even cities itself. It's such a young and rich country. There was no comparison to the bids, but Qatar won. We got 50% more vote than the United States. It wasn't close. And that process was the one that virtually everyone across the world looked at and said that's got to be compromised. And the real-world impact on that is that the nation of Qatar has very few people living in it, but a lot of money, and so they use a thing called the kafala labor system, where we basically get the poorest of the poor from third world countries, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Burma, and these guys sign up with recruitment companies, and they get placed into labor jobs to build things in these countries. And they have to go to the country. They give up their passport. They work in a labor camp, and they're not allowed to leave until they pay back the loan that they took out from the recruitment company, and that can take a few years. And then a small portion of their money will go back to their families in wherever they're from. It's very poor working conditions, and it's very low pay. It just happens to be a little bit better than what they could do in Nepal or Burma or something like that. In this case, the conditions are so bad, there's very little safety concerns. Accidents are common. To work work on the World Cup stuff in 120, 130 degree even heat, long hours, the squalor of these labor camps, it's brutal. And there's been, already, at least hundreds and hundreds of deaths associated with the World Cup sites, and over 1,000 just in general laborers since the World Cup bid came in.
People are dying, Dan. Dan, people are dying. That's just that simple.
People are dying, yeah. The Qatari government literally estimates, this is their own estimates, that we're on pace to 4,000 or 5,000 people dying to build these facilities and for these hotels and all the different stuff that will go on for the World Cup.
Well, what is Sepp Blatter saying about this when asked about it, Dan? I'm scouring a quote. I'm scouring the internet for a quote, and I don't see one.
Nobody says much. I mean, it's Amnesty International. It's the media. It's Jeremy Schaap. It's a lot of us in the media. It's the BBC and things like that. But, they just arrested 4 BBC journalists who are trying to document this stuff in that country. You're not dealing with anything that's remotely of any Western value. And so the kafala system is well known, and this isn't new stuff. It's basically the closest thing to slavery or forced labor that human society at this point in time allows. And it's pretty barbaric. And again, the safety conditions are just, you just have accidents and people die, and it's just the way it's viewed. And so you have these industrious, desperate, dedicated young men trying to help their families, and they can't do it. And just the way they're treated. We had, they had the earthquakes in Nepal recently. 10,000 people dead, villages leveled, families displaced, homes, and the Nepal government asked Qatar to send allow their workers to come home and mourn and help out. And in some aspects of the economy, they were allowed back, but anyone working on World Cup sites, because the deadlines are so tight and there's so much to do, were not allowed to go home, even just to visit and then return. And, it's just basic human dignity that you would allow someone to go do that. Can you imagine half your family's dead, the rest of them have their house leveled, and you're not allowed to leave because we have to build a World Cup? And so that's the real-world impact of those votes and that corruption. The thing that FIFA has done over the years has gone from guys making some extra money to the entire bid process getting so crazed that they would build a World Cup in a place where we should never hold the World Cup. And, we don't even get to the part where it was too hot in the summer, which we always knew, and now they have to move the World Cup to the winter, which screws up all the professional leagues. Like the Qatari vote is so impossible to defend and almost so clearly corrupted. It's I use it in a column today I wrote about it, like it's absolute power corrupts absolutely, is the old saying. This is the example of that. And you get nothing from FIFA. You get nothing from almost anybody to say anything about this stuff other than the human rights organizations and the media and some of these, very, very poor governments like Nepal and Burma and things like that, which nobody listens to.
Dan Wetzel of Yahoo Sports joining me here. So before I let you go, show me a silver lining. Show me a lining that's even approaching silver with these indictments, that everything that you just explained in detail can somehow, some way, be turned back in any manner, whether it's a vote, whether it's somebody taking a stand, whether it's somebody within FIFA standing up and having some sort of McCarthyist moment saying, have you no decency? Something. Dan, do you think anything can come out of this?
Look, what happened on Wednesday is great because at least symbolically, this was the first time anyone stood up to FIFA and said, enough, this isn't right. But they're not getting into these issues. They're getting into payouts and bank fraud and things like that.
Hey, Capone got busted for tax evasion, right, Dan?
Yeah, but what you're dealing with is what you're basically saying is we're trying to tell a government in the Middle East that's not how you treat people. It's such a more complex things like that. Yes, this could help change FIFA. You could have, Blatter just allows anything to go on. You could have a more respectable organization. You're never going to get rid of greed and bribery and those types of things, particularly on a global scale. People think the United States, our politicians are completely corrupt and every business is corrupt. And obviously there's some of that. But if you travel globally, internationally, and not like central London or like the Cancun Hilton, like you really go to third world countries, everything is corrupted at levels that you couldn't even fathom in the United States. So it's hard to apply our standards and say, oh, we're just going to clean up the world's corruption on global soccer. That's never going to happen. Could they ever strip the games from Qatar? I doubt it. I think it would take corporate sponsors. You don't hear anything from Visa. You don't hear anything from Coca-Cola. You don't hear anything from Adidas. You would need a total overhaul. You would need the governments of these Western countries to stand up. Quite honestly, considering the state of affairs in the Middle East, sadly, this probably doesn't even rank. So you don't hear a whole lot. It's a bad situation. And you can go online and you can watch the ESPN stuff that Shap's done and all the stuff in the Guardian papers and all the different things. It's incredibly powerful, and it's sickening stuff considering we're having people die the richest people on earth want to have a soccer tournament, and we need a playground built. So the poorest people on earth, some of them are dying to build it.
Dan,
I mean, it's unfathomable, but it's reality.
Dan, thank you for calling in, and as always, giving even more perspective on your perspective-laden columns. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich.
You bet. That's Dan Wetzel of Yahoo Sports joining us here on the program.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern. On Audience.